Hello and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek. I'm Siobhan Holt, news editor at PRWeek and your host for today. I'm joined by our editor-in-chief, Danny Rogers. Hi, Danny.
Hi, Siobhan. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And yourself?
Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. Suffering from a long weekend, but otherwise I'm okay.
And our guest today is Sarah Leembruggen. Sarah has over 25 years' experience in recruitment and is currently the managing director of The Work Search, a recruitment consultancy specifically for corporate PR and comms. Established in 1996, the business places senior-level corporate comms professionals into permanent roles in and around London. The Work Search has placed over 1,000 board and senior-level comms professionals with listed and privately owned companies in corporate comms, financial PR and sustainability communications. Thanks for joining us today, Sarah.
Thank you, and thanks for that introduction.
No, you're very
Although
welcome.
the 25 years did make me feel a little old.
Oh, sorry about that. So on today's episode, we're going to focus on recruitment in the PR and comms sector. And coincidentally, the Work Search has today launched its annual salary guide, which polls more than 400 corporate comms professionals. And that's on finding the latest trends in the jobs market.
Indeed.
And that covers everything, doesn't it? From pay and bonuses to staff benefits. Just to make you aware, there will be further details from this report published over the coming days on PRWeek, so stay tuned. But let's kick off on today's podcast. My first question is quite a tough one, but is recruitment getting harder in your opinion in the comms industry?
The answer is probably yes. Recruitment really mirrors the economy. So growth was pretty flat last year, and we saw a lot of companies that were waiting to see what was going to happen. So the first half of last year was quite quiet, with fewer people coming our way and fewer roles. But there was a turning point where we definitely saw, in the second half of the year, we saw companies hiring, but with caution. Okay. So there was a real upturn. More people coming our way, more roles coming our way. And yeah, so it made for quite an interesting year.
What do you think changed halfway through the year? That
confidence is always confidence. I think they just realised that actually things aren't as bad as we thought they're going to be. And, people were worried about going into recession, technical recession. So should they hire or not? But, in the second half, there was definitely more confidence around.
And what about this year so far? Is that a similar pattern, different?
It's getting better, for sure. And Q2, we've definitely seen an uplift in roles coming our way, which is great, and great. People, few, and long may it continue. So hopefully post-election, things just continue to get a bit brighter.
That's been the picture in the last couple of years. Every time we ask experts, they always say, it's been tough, but it seems to be getting better. But then it seems to kind of roll on. This sort of lack of confidence seems to be persisting a bit, does it?
It does, but, people still need to hire. They need to replace. And last year we saw a fair amount of contract roles. That was quite interesting because we focus on permanent recruitment. But to kind of get around some budgets, it's a bit easier to hire on a contract basis. So that was quite common last year. Mm-hmm. And, maybe that will be the same this year. There was a fair amount of movement, especially at senior level for agencies in the second half of the year. And in-house, again, they were fairly active at a senior level, which was quite surprising because notoriously comms directors, heads of comms are actually quite cautious. But I think finally, post-pandemic, they've actually got the confidence to move.
When you say senior level, this is kind of director of communications or head of external relations, those big corporate jobs. Yeah.
When we look at the survey, that level, or those levels, were the people that moved the most.
Okay.
So that was quite interesting.
And do you think that's because corporate affairs and corporate communications are now so important to big businesses that even though confidence maybe isn't that high in business generally, they all feel they've got to have really good senior comms advisors at the highest level?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And they are willing to replace them. And, that's where there was the most movement. So, yeah, it's I do think they are vital for any business now and more valued.
And which section would you say has been the hardest then to recruit? Anecdotally, we get that there's the deficit in mid-level range. Would you say that's something you've spotted in the trends?
Absolutely. Agencies really struggle at a mid-level. So account directors, for example, typically have anything from 4 to 8 years of experience. The average is 7 years of experience. And it's a really challenging role. They're managing up, they're managing down, they're across several clients. And so they often come to us wanting to transition in-house, hoping for a better work-life balance, hoping that the grass is greener and it'll be a little bit easier should they move in-house. However, what that does, it's leaving a shortfall in the industry. So there's a real deficit of account directors. And in fact, it's the same for account managers. That's a real pinch point too. But if you think about it, we're post-pandemic, very few companies were hiring at an entry level. So now we're a few years after the pandemic, there aren't enough people with a few years of experience. So another pinch point.
Yeah, we saw this back in the last recession, didn't we? In 2008, 2009, nobody recruited. And then in the early parts of the 2010s, there was no account managers. I remember it well.
Yeah, it's a disaster. It happens each time. Anytime the market, the economy isn't strong, everyone gets a bit nervous about hiring. So they just pull back. They prefer to, stop hiring altogether and not bring in people from the bottom, but it affects everything.
Yeah, you don't get the pipeline of people in that middle level, which is a problem in later years.
And could you say as well that it impacts the skills as well, that maybe the training hasn't been invested as a result, and then they might not be at the level they should be for the length of time they've been in the role?
Yes, absolutely. I was hearing, actually, particularly from agency bosses, they were saying when everyone came back to the office, they were quite surprised at the things they had missed whilst people were working from home. They actually hadn't noticed that perhaps their writing wasn't as strong, or their planning wasn't as strong, organisation, project management, whatever it may be, but they'd missed it because they hadn't had eyes on them, but actually they'd also fallen behind on training.
I mean, how long did lockdown last? Probably 6 months total? I'm amazed that had that big an impact on people's skills. But do you think it did?
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because we weren't going into the office every day as well. And you learn through osmosis. So if you're not there listening to your boss and seeing what's going on and hearing conversations and picking up the gems, then you're not going to learn as quickly. So dare I say, hybrid working has had an effect on training.
And this is why firms are so keen on getting their staff back for more days a week for this reason. And I suppose they're justified on that basis.
Yeah, absolutely. So the most popular working pattern is 3 days in the office and 2 days at home. But there was actually a little bit of an uplift with people going into the office just once a week and remote working. So I thought that was quite interesting in the report.
And then on the flip side, then, we've definitely seen a lot of change at the senior level in recent months. What's your view on why that could be happening?
Yes, it's different for in-house and agency. So in-house, as I said, there was a fair bit of movement at that senior level. But for agencies, it was happening more in the second part of the year with those senior moves. And dare I say, I think that's thanks to redundancies. So, in-house were tightening their belts, trimming their budgets, and, certainly they were actually making redundancies, as were agencies. So we did see some of those private equity-backed agency, the group-owned agencies, those big, larger agencies were making quite a few redundancies because they were having to cut costs because they hadn't met their targets. It was quite surprising to see how many rounds of redundancies some agencies were doing. It's disastrous, doing one round, but, some agencies were making 3 rounds of redundancies.
I find this fascinating because according to our research, I think we found 1 in 5 agencies made redundancies last year. I think that's probably a bit conservative. What would be your best bet at what percentage of agencies made redundancies last year as a guess?
Well, in theory, 9% of roles were made redundant. Yeah, so that was out of the 400 people, 9% were made redundant. Roles were made redundant. However, I do think it's higher. I think it's higher than that.
What's your guess? Half of agencies made redundancies last year?
No, maybe a third.
Okay, fair enough, which is still higher than
But it was low level. It wasn't in high volume.
No, a trickle rather than a big rush.
It's not just the redundancies, it's the fallout from it. So when a company makes redundancies, the fallout's huge because there are a lot of unhappy people, often new management. Not everyone buys into the new vision. So, and there's just an extraordinary amount of change. And they're usually quite unhappy places to be anyway, and they're not getting pay rises, and they're certainly not getting bonuses. So the reality is it's not just the redundancies, it's the fallout from it. And then people move and they go, come over here. It's better over here.
Yeah.
And, you know, we are paying pay rises and bonuses, and the atmosphere is feeling, you know, great over here, rather than quite an unhappy place where redundancies are taking place.
So, Sarah, what trends are we seeing in pay and in salaries? Because obviously that's what people are most interested in often all the time.
Yeah, of course they are. The most noticeable trend that we've seen over the last 5 years is a big shift in the junior and mid-level salaries, and that's because of demand. So even 5 years ago, you would pay an account director 40 to 60,000. Now you would pay an account director easily 55 to 70. That's a big shift. Another trend that we've seen is people flying through the ranks. We are meeting directors who have 8 years of experience.
Board directors.
Directors. Incredible. Typically, a director would have 10 years of experience minimum. Now, 8 years. So, yeah, people are flying up.
And are they able to justify it because they've basically handled so much through COVID?
I think agencies, when they spot really good people, they want to look after them, and they continue to promote them to keep them happy. And, when they're ambitious, they're often asking for that next promotion, for that next pay rise. So they do move through the ranks fairly quickly. But on the other hand, the employer absolutely wants to keep them.
Yeah.
So they will continue to promote them fairly quickly. But yeah, as I say, this 8 years is really quite impressive that they're moving through quite so quickly.
Okay, so the mid-level people are getting big salary increases. What about the top of agencies? Are they the senior people getting big salary rises?
They are. So the ADs and SAMs are paid very well, and they are getting the biggest pay increases. And MDs and CEOs, they also got the biggest pay increases.
Okay. And what about in-house then, corporate affairs directors?
Yes, corporate affairs directors, they actually didn't fare that well when it came to pay increases, but they did get the largest bonuses.
Okay.
So that was quite interesting.
What sort of bonuses are they getting?
So the average bonus for corporate affairs directors was 29%,
Wow.
and comms directors 28%. They did very well.
Very well.
And agencies, what was quite interesting there, the MDs of practice areas, they too didn't get a great pay rise, but they got the biggest bonuses.
Okay.
So I think employers were trying to keep them happy without increasing their big salary bill.
Yeah. So it's a one-off payment rather than something they're committing to for the next 5 or 10 years.
Absolutely.
So overall, are comms professionals happy with their pay, Sarah?
Yes, 82% said they're very happy with their pay, considering that bonuses were down for agencies. And the pay increases weren't great. In fact, for agencies, they were half from the previous year. I think it's quite impressive that 82% overall are very happy.
Yeah, frankly, I'm amazed that 80% of people are happy with their salaries. Journalists are never happy with their salaries. I'll tell you that right now. And I imagine in lots of different industries, people are very unhappy about their pay. But for more than 80% to say they're happy with what they're paid. But I guess, as you say, previous years, they got quite big increases. So overall, they've done pretty well over the last 5 years or so.
Yes. And on the bonus front, there were some big differences for in-house and agency. So in-house, 71% of professionals got a bonus, and that was a slight increase from the year before, whereas 47% of agency professionals got a bonus. Yeah. So that's less than half, and that's less than the year before. In fact, that's an all-time low.
So if you are a comms professional, how would you go about checking to know if you're on the right sort of level for your wage?
So first of all, download the salary guide. It's certainly an industry standard for corporate communications. Employers use it to benchmark their teams and employees to ask for a pay rise. The challenge that we find with the survey is that titles vary widely across the sector. So what we noted is the average years of experience in the report, just to help with where you might sit within the survey. We also included what we called the most common range. So that's a salary bracket of salaries that we see, that we most commonly see. So we advise that you do look at that because they're slightly tighter salary brackets and certainly very representative for each of the levels. However, there are lots of considerations when you look at the report and you're trying to work out where you sit. Because if you're planning on going in and asking your boss for a pay rise, you do need to take into account how much experience that you've got. And, what level of responsibility, and are you performing? As well as your contribution to new business and your sector expertise. This is quite interesting because certain industry sectors pay a little bit more than others.
Which ones?
So highly regulated ones, financial services, for example.
Healthcare?
They will sit in the upper quartile because it's quite technical. And consequently, that skill, that knowledge, it pays a bit more.
I imagine it goes back to your point as well, that they want to keep that expertise. I imagine that's quite hard to recruit for. So maybe the agency bosses and comms bosses are paying for that
most
to keep
definitely.
that skill.
Yeah, for sure. And it comes down to supply and demand and desirability as well. A generalist role versus a specialist role. We find it very hard to find people with financial services experience because perhaps it's a bit more exciting to work for big consumer-facing brands.
Or entertainment businesses.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah, it's always been the case.
So, there's quite a few considerations. So it's actually quite complex, but you also need to take into account the financial state of the company. Naturally, you're not going to get a pay rise if the company isn't doing well at all.
And was there anything else, Sarah, from the report that sort of stood out from the data?
I thought the number of people with a disability was quite interesting because it's moved up from 5 to 10%. It's actually doubled in a year. And in the previous year, it was 4%. So it moved from 4 to 5 to then it jumped to 10. But generally, I do think there's a positive trend in disability employment, which is backed by the government. But also companies are making real efforts to raise awareness of invisible disabilities to drive disability inclusion.
So what's an invisible disability, for example?
So autism, dyslexia, PTSD, ADHD, brain injuries, things that you just can't visibly see when you look at someone. You can't see that disability.
So in your opinion then, do you think the industry's gotten better at supporting staff with disabilities?
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's a bit more comfort now and support within companies to actually say if you've got a hidden disability, and you won't be judged for it. If anything, you will be supported for it, which I think, is amazing. And, hopefully companies will continue to encourage awareness. So colleagues and clients, everyone's aware of people's strengths. And it's also thinking about, people's career paths as well, and really making the most of people's strengths. So, for example, if you've got dyslexia, you might be really good skills in certain areas, but you may not have the attention to detail that you need. So there are ways and means where other people could be checking your work, but you could be incredibly creative and a great problem solver. So it's then looking at people with disabilities and actually really playing to their strengths. And, I do think, and, I do talk to employers and they are saying that they're doing that.
Okay, let's go on to talk about benefits, because you talked a lot about pay earlier. What benefits did comms professionals want? You surveyed staff benefits, right?
Yes, absolutely. So since the pandemic, professionals have really held a high value on flexibility and hybrid working. That goes without saying. But in terms of benefits, what we did, we looked at what employers are actually offering employees, and then we asked what do you actually want, and compared the two, because we thought that would be quite interesting. Actually, are employers offering professionals what they really want? And the answer is not really. They're a little bit misaligned. So the benefits which are important to employees are private healthcare for yourself and your family, work from anywhere for up to 4 weeks, private dental cover, enhanced maternity, paternity pay, and sabbaticals. However, what they're not bothered about, which many employers seem to be offering, free breakfast, fresh fruit, snacks, cycle to work, travel insurance, or recruitment referral bonuses.
Oh, okay. A lot of these benefits, these softer benefits like free breakfast, were introduced post-pandemic, weren't they? Particularly with the cost of living crisis, but maybe they're not much benefit anymore.
Not when you look at how much companies spend on benefits, and you could have 25 benefits on offer. But the reality is you actually only really care about a handful. So I think that, there's something in probably changing it and really focusing on the ones that are important to employees, and then maybe putting in 1 or 2 bespoke ones according to level. Because an account manager is probably going to be interested in a free gym membership, and a senior comms director may be more interested in putting more money into their pension.
Do most companies offer a menu that employees can choose from, though?
Some do. They tend to be the larger companies that have that in place, those flexible benefits packages, but they're rarer.
And there were some interesting figures on the gender pay gap as well in the report. What did it show?
Yeah, there's a visible gender pay gap. Men earn a whopping 11% more than women, and their bonuses are 4% higher.
Oh dear.
So the good news is it's down from the previous year, but the bad news is 11% is actually 3% higher than the national average. So it's, I suspect it's down to a lot of companies who don't need to report on their gender pay, still not playing ball.
And remind us what size of company doesn't have to?
I think it's 250.
So if you've got fewer than 250 employees, you don't have to report your gender pay, and therefore they can get away with not having very good records.
Yeah, indeed.
Interesting, our top 150 report that's currently on our site, of the 150 agencies, more than half had a female CEO. In fact, more had a female CEO than had a male CEO. I think it was about 87 or something of the 150. So it does seem there's a lot of female bosses in PR agencies. So it's strange that women aren't getting as good pay rises.
Indeed. But then if you look at the amount of senior women there are, there's only a third compared to 2/3 at a junior level.
Okay.
So, it is a bit of a triangle when you look at the shape of women getting to the top.
So quite a lot of female bosses.
Well done, the female CEOs. But yeah, we do lose a lot of senior women on the way.
So Sarah, bearing in mind all these different factors, holistically, what should employers be offering staff in order to acquire them and retain them more effectively?
So putting salaries and bonuses aside, it's really important to make your offering as attractive as possible. And respondents overwhelmingly tell us in order to stand out, they really must provide a clear career path, flexible working, hybrid working, training programs, meaningful work, a compelling vision, and foster a diverse and inclusive culture. So collectively, these are all as appealing as pay.
Interesting. Must be quite difficult to provide meaningful, what was your term? Meaningful employment? Or
yes, indeed.
How do they do
meaningful work, purposeful work. We hear that all the time. They want to feel what they're doing is worthwhile, making a difference, doing some good in the world.
Hence all this purpose ESG trends in recent years.
Have you had anyone maybe that's turned around and said that they don't want to work for an agency because of who they're working with or the work that some campaigns that maybe they've seen? Is that anecdotally anything you've ever experienced?
Yes, that does happen. Interestingly, an agency owner left his partnership because he was feeling very uncomfortable about the type of clients that the business were working with. which is a big deal, leaving a partnership.
So he was a co-owner, not the sole owner.
No, he was a co-owner. He felt that the clients weren't aligning with his values.
Were they environmental values or were they ethical values?
They were ethical values.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it certainly happens.
And we did a survey last year on Gen Z, and that did crop up in some of the results that people were very concerned about who the agencies were working with and speaking out against that. So I suppose it is on the rise.
Well, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about fossil fuels? Are we talking about tobacco brands? Are we just talking about...
Yes, so the standard industry sectors that people are not interested in, tobacco, vaping, oil and gas, fossil fuels. So new green energy, great. Fossil fuels, no.
Sometimes they're the same company though, aren't they?
Precisely. Alcohol, that's a bit hit and miss.
Okay.
Otherwise, most people are open to most industry sectors. Healthcare, they might shy away from, but that's mainly because of the technical skills that could be required. But yeah, on the whole, they're the ones that stand out, that people shy away from.
And what about the geopolitics side? So do some employees or potential employees prefer not to work for clients from certain countries?
Not now. Obviously, a lot of agencies let go of their Russian clients. So, that was quite interesting.
You don't get much pushback on Saudi Arabia or Qatar or any of these countries?
No.
Interesting.
No.
So looking forward then, what would your predictions be for the recruitment market for the rest of 2024?
Well, uncertainty still continues, but with more optimism. So we predict that's going to be lots of mid-rank movement, as there was last year. Most professionals will still want to move in-house, yet there will not be enough vacancies for the demand. Hopefully fewer redundancies after the housekeeping of last year. And we predict that agencies will make strides to foster more inclusive and diverse cultures.
Let's talk about that last one, because obviously DE&I has been a massive thing in the last 5 years, but we've picked up a little bit of a backlash against that. But do you feel there's still a demand from employees for more diversity and more equity in the businesses they work for?
They seem to be more interested in gender balance rather than ethnic diversity. And that's because they can see very visibly when you look at the boards of, some agencies, for example, that they could be quite heavy with men. So they want to proactively and positively hire women to actually get more balance. So we do hear briefs where, they are actively looking for more women. We aren't getting that many requests, surprisingly, for more ethnically diverse candidates.
Very interesting.
That's not across all employers. We actually see, I was thinking agencies. In-house it is different. They seem to be just a little bit more together, a little bit slicker. And for some clients, we've actually done what we call blind recruitment, where all traces of gender, ethnicity are taken off a CV. In fact, anything that could bias any reader. So from where someone went to school, where someone went to university, their hobbies, because netball, for example, you could probably identify that's a woman. And where they've worked, we would describe where they've worked. We don't always keep the names of the companies on, but we would keep their responsibilities in, but we would take out any pronouns, for example. So just really strip the CV back to bare bones of this person is bringing great experience to the table, and that's all you're going to know.
And how prevalent is blind recruitment? Is it just the occasional?
It's the
client?
occasional. It's the occasional.
And is it increasing or not so much?
No, I'd say it's the same. It's just the occasional each year that we're asked to do a blind campaign.
What advice then would you give maybe to comms bosses that are hiring? Is there a top tip?
I would say they need to think about the future of the person sitting in front of them and what their career path looks like. So instead of thinking, okay, I've got an associate director here, you actually need to be thinking, this is a future director. This could be a future partner. This could be the future MD of the business. And actually, really thinking through their career path and actually hiring, in your mind, is this a future director, partner, MD of our business? Can I see them in that role? And if you can, great. Otherwise, you're really just hiring for the here and now and filling an immediate gap. What candidates really want is a career path. And so, you really should bear that in mind, is when you are hiring, has this person got a real future here?
So thank you to Sarah for today. That was really insightful.
Thank you.
And I hope you've enjoyed listening to the podcast. Do check out PRWeek.com for our coverage on the Work Search Annual Salary Guide and all the latest industry news. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, then we'd love it if you could leave a review, please, wherever you access PRWeek's Beyond the Noise podcast. This goes live every 2 weeks, but look out for our shorter news-based podcast, Noise in Brief, which comes out next week. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.